Think you know aviation? Think again. What if I told you there was once a flying machine that required pilots to literally stand on top of high-speed, spinning blender blades? Later in this video, we will show you that exact terrifying death trap. Welcome to the Wild West of bizarre aviation history, where visionary engineers threw standard aerodynamics out the window to build the craziest flying machines imaginable. From jet-powered farm equipment to giant flying whales that helped us reach the moon, we are counting down 10 bizarre vintage aircraft you have never seen before. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, what is the weirdest vehicle you have ever seen? Starting off our countdown at number 1 is the Miles Aerovan, a British twin-engine transport aircraft from 1945 that completely redefined the concept of a flying box. The dream was highly practical. Engineers wanted a cheap, short-haul freighter carrying a massive 3,000-pound payload using very low power. They needed a workhorse to load standard family cars without specialized equipment. However, the reality of physics turned it into a bizarre, tadpole-shaped contraption. To accommodate massive rear-loading doors, the tail boom was positioned unnaturally high, making it top-heavy and slow. If you look at the Miles Aerovan, it does not look like a traditional airplane. It looks exactly like a vintage camper van that someone accidentally glued a pair of wings onto. Imagine taking a classic Airstream trailer, flattening the sides, adding a massive bubble window at the front for the pilot, and strapping it to a tricycle undercarriage. It looks like a prop straight out of a claymation movie, waddling through the sky with all the grace of a flying brick. It completely ignored the sleek aesthetic of the 1940s for pure interior cargo volume. Despite its ridiculous appearance, you have to admire the sheer, unfiltered practicality of the design. It prioritized function over form to an extreme degree, cruising at a sluggish 112 miles per hour. Would you be willing to take a cross-country flight in a slow-flying caravan like this, or would you prefer a regular passenger jet? Let me know your thoughts down below. But if you think a flying camper van is weird, just wait until you see the Soviet Union's highly successful attempt at making a military cargo plane that looks like a sad cartoon character. Moving on to number 2, we have the Antonov An-72, a Soviet transport aircraft that looks like it is constantly surprised to be flying. The dream in 1977 was ambitious. The military needed a rugged aircraft capable of operating in harsh environments on unpaved Siberian runways. To achieve incredible lift, engineers utilized the Coanda effect. By mounting 2 massive turbofan engines aggressively forward and directly above the wings, high-speed exhaust gases blew over the wing surface. This generated immense extra lift at very low speeds, creating a highly successful but weird-looking aircraft. Because of those 2 huge jet engines perched right on top of the wings, staring forward like a pair of giant, wide-set eyes, the aircraft quickly earned a hilarious pop culture nickname. The Soviets affectionately called it Cheburashka, named after a famous big-eared Russian cartoon character. To Western observers, it looks a bit like a sad flying bulldog, or perhaps a mechanical frog puffing out its metallic cheeks. The way the engines bulge over the fuselage completely throws off the visual balance, making it look cartoonishly disproportionate and incredibly front-heavy. It is a brilliant piece of aerodynamic engineering hidden behind a very goofy, staring face. It is a heavy lifter, capable of carrying over 16,000 pounds of cargo while taking off in less than 2,000 feet. If you were an aerospace engineer, would you sacrifice a sleek design just to get better lift on a snowy runway? Drop a comment and tell me what you think. And speaking of weird staring faces, our next aircraft was literally designed to look like a giant bug hovering silently in the sky above you. At number 3, we have the Edgeley Optica, a British light aircraft that first flew in 1979 and looks more like an insect than an airplane. The dream was to create a low-cost, fixed-wing alternative to helicopters for aerial observation and police patrols. Helicopters are notoriously expensive to maintain and incredibly loud. John Edgeley's brilliant solution was to build an aircraft with a fully glazed panoramic cabin placed directly in front of a slow-turning ducted fan. The reality was a bizarre science fiction-looking machine that cruised very slowly and quietly. Visually, the Edgley Optica is the closest humanity has ever come to building a mechanical dragonfly. The cockpit is a giant glass bubble that looks exactly like the compound eye of a massive bug, while the ducted fan directly behind it looks like a small jet engine that got squished between twin tail booms. If you are a science fiction fan, it instantly reminds you of the bubble-canopied TIE fighters from Star Wars, or perhaps a futuristic escape pod. It is the ultimate flying observatory, completely alien compared to any standard light aircraft. It offers one of the absolute best views in aviation history, cruising leisurely at around 80 miles per hour. Would you feel safe flying inside a giant glass bubble with a massive fan strapped right to your back? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you think the Optica looks strange, wait until you see an aircraft so impossibly fat and heavy, it was literally used to carry pieces of space rockets across the United States. Coming in at number 4 is the Aerospace Line's Super Guppy, a plane that proves aerodynamics is sometimes just a polite suggestion. The dream for this colossal machine was born during the 1960s space race. NASA had a massive logistical nightmare, transporting the gigantic stages of the Saturn V rocket from California to Florida. Moving them by boat took weeks. The wild solution was to take a Boeing transport, cut it open, and graft a comically large bloated upper fuselage onto it. The reality was an aircraft so impossibly huge that engineers initially doubted it could fly. When you look at the Super Guppy, you are essentially looking at a pregnant metallic whale swimming gracefully through the clouds. It looks like a normal vintage airliner that accidentally swallowed a blimp whole. The entire front nose section is hinged, swinging open 110 degrees like a giant gaping mouth to devour oversized cargo. In pop culture, it resembles a gigantic silver zeppelin that decided to grow wings, or maybe a cartoon caricature of an airplane. It is so utterly massive that it actively hurts your brain trying to understand its flight. Despite its hilarious bloated shape, this 50,000-pound flying whale was crucial. Without it, the Apollo moon landings might have been significantly delayed. Do you think modern cargo companies should bring back this giant, bloated design for oversized freight? I want to read your opinions below. But if the Super Guppy was a triumph of engineering for space exploration, our next aircraft is a textbook example of a terrible idea involving a jet engine and a heavy farm tractor. Number 5 brings us to the absolute madness of the PZL M15 Belphegor. The dream here was pure Soviet agricultural ambition in the 1970s, brought to life by Polish engineers. The Soviet airline wanted a modern, highly efficient crop duster to cover massive state-owned farms. For some inexplicable reason, officials insisted it needed to be powered by a jet engine to keep up with the jet age. The reality was a horrifying amalgamation of technologies. It was a slow-flying biplane equipped with massive chemical hoppers and screaming across the fields with a thirsty turbofan engine. The Belphegor looks exactly like a vehicle custom-built for a villain in a post-apocalyptic Mad Max movie. It is an unholy marriage between a 1920s biplane and a modern jet, painted in utilitarian colors and dripping with chemical sprayers. With its twin tail booms and the jet engine awkwardly mounted on top of the short fuselage, it looks like a piece of heavy industrial farm equipment that somehow gained the ability to fly. It quickly earned its nickname, named after a noisy mythological demon, perfectly describing the screaming monster terrifying farmers from the sky. Weighing over 12,000 pounds fully loaded, it proudly holds the title as the only jet-powered biplane crop duster in aviation history. Why do you think engineers thought putting a fast jet engine on a slow biplane was a good idea? Let's debate in the comments. Now, if combining a jet and a biplane sounds crazy, wait until you see an American fighter plane that completely struggled to decide what era of history it actually belonged to. At number 6, we have the Ryan FR Fireball, a United States Navy fighter plane struggling with a massive technological identity crisis. The dream in 1944 was to bridge the dangerous gap between reliable propeller aircraft and the brand-new, unproven technology of jet engines. Early jets were notoriously slow to accelerate, making them incredibly dangerous for aircraft carrier landings. The Navy's solution was a mixed-power aircraft equipped with a conventional piston engine and propeller in the nose, alongside a hidden turbojet engine tucked away in the rear fuselage for high-speed combat. The Ryan FR Fireball is the absolute mullet of the military aviation world. Traditional business in the front, jet-age party in the back. From a head-on view, it looks like a standard classic World War II propeller fighter. But as it passes by, you notice the suspicious lack of side exhaust pipes and the gaping jet nozzle hiding in the tail section. It is a technological Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It looks as if engineers took two completely different aircraft blueprints, cut them in half, and welded them together in a dark hangar. It was a heavy hybrid, weighing over 10,000 pounds, but it was doomed from the start as pure jet technology rapidly improved. Would you rather fly a reliable propeller plane or a pure jet instead of this confusing heavy hybrid? Drop your preference in the comments. And as we move into the top 4, things are going to get much more futuristic, starting with a machine that looks straight out of a science fiction cartoon. Landing at number 7 is the Piasecki VZ-8 Air Jeep, the United States military's literal attempt at creating a flying car. The dream in the late 1950s was to give the Army a versatile vehicle that could do everything a standard Jeep could do, but effortlessly glide over any terrain, including swamps and steep mountains. The Army wanted a low-flying, rugged transport vehicle that ordinary soldiers could easily drive without pilot training. Piasecki Aircraft's bold solution was using two massive horizontal ducted rotors placed directly in front of and behind the pilot in a tandem configuration. Looking at the Air Jeep, you immediately think of hoverboards or a real-life speeder bike from the forests of Endor in Star Wars. It is essentially a flat, rectangular metal platform measuring 26 feet long, with two giant fans cut into it and a couple of standard seats bolted right in the middle. The pilot and passenger sat completely exposed to the elements, hovering just a few feet off the ground in a machine that looked like a giant militarized drone built half a century before drones were common. It is a technological tragedy that this 2,000-pound flying Jeep never made it into full mass production because helicopters proved more capable. Do you think modern soldiers could use a hovering troop transport like the Air Jeep today? Let me know what you think. But if you think the Air Jeep was a wild concept, wait until you hear the deafening roar of our next machine, which tried to be a helicopter and a passenger airliner at the exact same time. Screaming in at number 8 is the Fairey Rotodyne, a brilliant British marvel of engineering that was ultimately killed by its own voice. The dream in the late 1950s was revolutionary: create a large compound gyroplane that could pick up 40 passengers in London and drop them off in Paris, bypassing congested airports entirely. It used two conventional turboprop engines for fast-forward flight. But for vertical takeoff, it utilized a massive top rotor powered by tip jets, small jet nozzles literally mounted on the tips of the rotor blades, fed by compressed air and fuel. The Fairey Rotodyne is a pure mid-century steampunk fantasy brought to glorious life. It is an enormous, sleek airliner that somehow has a massive, heavy helicopter rotor bolted securely to its roof. The sight of this giant machine lifting straight up into the air, with literal jet flames shooting out of the tips of its 90-foot spinning blades in the twilight, was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It looks like a retro-futuristic transport vehicle from a sci-fi comic book, a beautiful but monstrous chimera of aviation design. Unfortunately, the sound it produced was a percussive noise so aggressive it could shatter windows, dooming the 70,000-pound aircraft forever. If engineers could figure out a way to silence the engines, would you commute to work in a giant gyroplane flying at almost 200 miles per hour? Tell me your thoughts below. Our next aircraft also tried to combine a plane and a helicopter, but it attempted a maneuver so incredibly dangerous, it pushed the boundaries of aerodynamics to the breaking point. Coming in at number 9 is the Sikorsky S-72 X-Wing, a project that attempted one of the most dangerous aerodynamic concepts in history, the stopped rotor. The dream for this NASA project in the 1980s was the ultimate holy grail of aviation. They wanted an aircraft that could take off and hover perfectly like a helicopter, but then fly at the high subsonic speeds of a jet. The audacious plan was to use a massive rigid 4-blade rotor to lift off vertically. Then, as it gained forward speed, the pilot would completely stop the spinning blades mid-air. Visually, the S-72 in its X-Wing configuration looks like a standard sleek jet fighter that someone forcefully hammered a giant, thick cross onto. When parked on the tarmac, it looks exactly like an X-Wing starfighter from Star Wars, hence the project's name, but mounted horizontally on a conventional fuselage. It is deeply unsettling to look at because your brain knows that helicopter blades are supposed to spin and airplane wings are supposed to be straight. Seeing 4 massive thick blades locked in an X pattern feels like a glitch in the matrix of aerospace design. Attempting to stop a spinning rotor at over 200 miles per hour was an aerodynamic nightmare, and the project was canceled before it could be fully tested. Would you have the courage to be the test pilot for the heavily modified, structurally terrifying X-Wing? Let's hear your bravery in the comments. And now it is time for our final aircraft. If you thought the X-Wing was crazy, our number 1 pick is so insanely dangerous it will make your blood run cold. Finally, at number 10, we have reached the absolute pinnacle of aviation madness, the Delackner HZ-1 Aerocycle, a flying machine that was essentially a weaponized airborne lawnmower. The dream in the mid-1950s was to provide every single foot soldier with a personal flying machine for reconnaissance. The Army wanted a flying motorcycle so incredibly easy to fly, a standard infantryman could master it in just 20 minutes using kinesthetic control, simply leaning your body to steer. The design was shockingly simple: a small 40-horsepower outboard motor, a tiny platform, and 2 counter-rotating helicopter blades. The Aerocycle is pure, unfiltered nightmare fuel. It is the real-world equivalent of the Green Goblin's glider from Spider-Man, but designed by someone with absolutely zero regard for basic occupational safety. The horrifying reality? Those unshielded razor-sharp blades with a massive 15-foot diameter were positioned directly below the pilot's feet. Imagine strapping yourself to a tiny metal pole, revving up a massive exposed blender directly beneath your combat boots, and leaning your body weight to steer while hovering 50 feet in the air without a parachute. One strong gust of wind, one loss of balance at its maximum speed of 75 miles per hour, and the pilot would fall directly into the spinning rotors. Unsurprisingly, the military realized giving teenagers flying meat grinders was a terrible strategic idea. Look closely at this thing. Would you step onto the Aerocycle for $1 million? I genuinely want to know. Leave your answer in the comments right now. And there you have it. 10 of the most bizarre and dangerous vintage aircraft that actually took to the skies. The history of aviation is built on brilliant engineers who bravely pushed the absolute boundaries of what is possible, even if it meant building a terrifying flying death trap. Which of these wacky flying machines was your absolute favorite? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this wild ride, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell. See you next time. Think airplanes have always looked like a metal tube with 2 wings attached? Think again. What if I told you the military once secretly poured millions into building an actual flying saucer? Or that brave pilots during World War II strapped themselves into a rocket-powered death trap capable of dissolving them alive before they even saw the enemy? Welcome to the bizarre side of aviation history. Some of these mechanical monstrosities completely defied the laws of physics, while others look like they belong in a science fiction movie. Today we are exploring the 10 weirdest, craziest, and truly unbelievable vintage airplanes that actually took to the skies. Hit that subscribe button right now and let us dive straight into the absolute madness. Starting off at number 1, we have an aircraft that looks less like a plane and more like a massive piece of flying plumbing. Meet the Stipa Caproni, often referred to as the flying barrel. Built in Italy in 1932 by aeronautical engineer Luigi Stipa, this bizarre machine was designed around a very specific aerodynamic theory. Stipa believed that by enclosing the propeller and the engine inside a hollow tube-shaped fuselage, he could compress the airflow and dramatically increase the engine efficiency using Bernoulli principles. This is essentially the grandfather of modern turbofan engines. But looking at it, the design is completely absurd. The fuselage was basically a giant wooden barrel with small wings bolted onto the sides. The pilot, Domenico Antonini, had an incredibly strange and noisy job. He essentially had to sit perched on top of this giant wooden tube, straddling the hollow center where massive amounts of air were being violently sucked through by the spinning propeller. Imagine the deafening roar of a heavy engine echoing inside a giant wooden drum right beneath your seat while you try to navigate through the open skies above. Surprisingly, the Stipa Caproni actually flew quite well. In fact, it was incredibly stable, but its top speed was a measly 81 miles per hour. The immense aerodynamic drag created by that massive barrel shape canceled out any efficiency gained by the internal propeller. The Italian military decided it was way too slow and canceled the project. On our weirdness meter, this flying barrel gets a solid 7 out of 10. But hey, if you think a flying barrel is strange, wait until you see the top-secret military project stolen straight from Area 51. At number 2, we step into the paranoid era of the Cold War with the Avro Canada VZ-9 Avrocar. This was not just an airplane that looked weird, it was a functional flying saucer funded by the United States Army and Air Force. In the 1950s, the military was desperate for a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that could hover below enemy radar and then blast off at supersonic speeds to intercept Soviet bombers. Designer John Frost utilized the Coanda effect, blowing engine exhaust over a curved saucer-shaped surface for a massive lift. The human stakes here were absolutely immense. Test pilots weighing around 180 pounds were essentially strapping themselves onto a giant, unproven jet-powered frisbee weighing thousands of pounds. If the central fan failed, there were no wings to glide on. The machine would just drop like a stone. The military hoped this incredible machine would hit speeds of Mach 3 and soar into the stratosphere. The disappointing reality was that it became an absolute disaster. The heavy Avrocar could barely manage to hover a measly 3 feet off the ground during early testing. Any higher and the saucer would enter a terrifying, uncontrollable wobble known as hubcapping, rocking back and forth violently like a dropped hubcap on concrete. It generated a deafening amount of noise, kicked up blinding dust, and cooked pilots with heat. On our weirdness meter, because the government actually tried building a UFO, the Avrocar scores an 8.5. While the military was failing to build flying saucers, some civilian inventors were looking at everyday household items for aviation inspiration, leading to a bizarre creation that looked exactly like a giant flying metal umbrella. Coming in at number 3 is the incredibly strange Nemeth parasol. Have you ever looked at a perfectly good conventional airplane and thought about replacing the wings with a giant, perfectly round disc? In 1934, a group of university students led by Stephen Nemeth did exactly that. They took a standard fuselage from a conventional biplane and attached a massive circular wing directly above it, making it look like a flying umbrella. The goal was not just to look crazy, it was designed to completely solve the deadly aviation problem of mid-air stalls. Nemeth theorized that a circular wing would maintain lift at impossibly steep angles, making the plane practically stall-proof. Imagine being the test pilot for this strange machine. You are taking off in an aircraft that completely defies all conventional logic of wingspan and aspect ratio. But the absolute craziest part of this entire experiment is that it actually worked flawlessly. The Nemeth parasol was incredibly gentle to fly. The brave pilot could pull the nose up to a terrifyingly steep angle, cut the engine completely, and simply float safely down toward the solid earth. Instead of plummeting nose first into the dirt, the plane would gently parachute down, landing at a crawling speed of just 25 miles per hour. It was arguably one of the safest airplanes of its era. Unfortunately, the Great Depression meant nobody had the money to buy it. For proving that a flying pizza box can actually save lives, the Nemeth Parasol gets a 6.5 on our weirdness meter. Symmetry is the golden rule of aviation. Well, our next aircraft completely threw that rule out, and looking at it might cause headaches. Number 4 brings us to the Blohm & Voss BV-141, a German World War II aircraft that looks like it was assembled incorrectly by a confused mechanic. Designed by Dr. Richard Vogt, this tactical reconnaissance plane is famous for its shocking and extreme asymmetry. The main fuselage, the engine, and the tail were all completely offset to the left side, while the pilot and crew sat in a heavily glazed greenhouse-like pod out on the right wing. The German Air Force specifically requested a scout plane with completely unobstructed forward views. Vogt decided the best solution was to just move the crew entirely out of the way of the spinning propeller. The human stakes for the crew were absolutely terrifying. Sitting inside that fragile glass pod, you were incredibly exposed to enemy machine gun fire, hanging out on the edge of the wing like a sitting duck. Furthermore, it looked like it should immediately spin out of control the second it left the runway. But thanks to brilliant engineering, the weight of the heavy crew pod perfectly counteracted the torque of the massive spinning BMW engine. Test pilots reported that it actually flew beautifully and handled significantly better than many perfectly symmetrical planes. It could reach impressive top speeds of 270 miles per hour. However, its strange looks made military officials deeply uncomfortable, and only a handful were built. For giving every aerodynamicist a severe panic attack, the BV-141 earns a solid 9 on our weirdness meter. Asymmetry is definitely one thing, but what if you built a plane that looked exactly like a giant flying insect with a massive circular ring instead of wings? At number 5 is the Snecma Coleoptère, a name which literally translates to beetle in French. This 1950s experimental aircraft looks exactly like a heavy jet engine wearing a giant metal barrel. Instead of traditional wings, it featured an annular or ring wing design. It was explicitly designed for vertical takeoff and landing operations, aiming to allow fast fighter jets to operate without needing long, vulnerable runways. The heavy coleopter would sit straight up on its tail, blast off vertically into the sky like a rocket, and then eventually transition over into horizontal flight. Here is the terrifying part. To land, the aircraft had to transition back to vertical flight and land entirely on its tail. Let us talk about the absolute nightmare this was for the lone test pilot, Auguste Morel. There were absolutely no computers to help him calculate the descent. To land, Morel had to slowly back the heavy aircraft down toward the Earth, essentially flying backward and blind. He was forced to look over his shoulder through a tiny window in the floor, trying to balance a massive jet engine on roaring hot fuel exhaust. During its 9th test flight, the aircraft suddenly lost control while trying to transition back to a vertical hover. It began spinning wildly and plummeted rapidly toward the ground. Morel barely managed to eject safely, but he suffered severe spinal injuries and the bizarre machine was completely destroyed. For its radical ring design and terrifying landing procedure, it gets an 8.5. Pause here. If you had to risk your life testing one of these first 5 planes, which would you choose? Comment below, because the next aircraft definitely requires even more bravery. Number 6 is the Convair XFY-1 Pogo. Built for the United States Navy in the early 1950s, the Pogo was another highly radical attempt at a vertical takeoff and landing fighter. The idea was to put these fighters on the decks of cargo ships for submarine protection. The Pogo featured a delta wing shape and was powered by a massive Allison turboprop engine generating 5,500 horsepower, driving 2 giant contra-rotating propellers. It sat vertically on the tarmac, resting on small wheels attached directly to its reinforced tail fins. The test pilot Skeets Coleman had to climb up a massive 20-foot ladder just to get into the cramped cockpit. The seat then rotated 90 degrees, so he was lying flat on his back facing the open sky. Taking off was relatively easy. You just throttle up and shoot straight up into the air like a rocket. But landing the Pogo was an exercise in pure, unfiltered terror. Coleman had to approach the landing pad horizontally, pitch the nose straight up, stall the aircraft perfectly in midair, and then back down very slowly downward. He had to constantly look over his shoulder, judging the distance to the solid ground, perfectly fighting unpredictable crosswinds, while a roaring double propeller chewed the air inches from his face. The Navy eventually realized that expecting average combat pilots to perform this circus act on the pitching deck of a moving ship was impossible. For turning pilots into backwards flying astronauts, the Pogo gets an 8. The Pogo was impossibly hard to land, but what if instead of landing on wheels, you had to catch a tiny metal wire midair with your nose? At number 7, we have the Ryan X-13 Vertige. The 1950s was an era completely obsessed with making airplanes take off without using runways. But the X-13 took this vertical concept to a whole new level of absolute insanity. It was a sleek jet-powered dart, but if you look very closely, you will quickly notice something extremely important is missing. It had zero landing gear. There were no wheels, no metal skids, absolutely nothing. So how exactly did this jet airplane safely return to the ground? It literally hung from a wire. The Vertige operated entirely from a custom flatbed trailer that could be raised vertically. At the very top of the trailer was a heavy steel cable. The nose of the X-13 featured a small hook. Test pilot Pete Girard had to fly this jet vertically, inch closer to the raised steel platform, and literally hook the nose of his jet onto the wire, hanging it like a piece of meat. Imagine the sheer human stakes here. You are hovering a screaming jet engine mere feet off the ground, fighting turbulent air with completely obscured vision. You are trying to thread a needle with a multi-million-dollar aircraft. If you miss the wire or if the engine hiccups for a fraction of a second, you crash backward into the earth and violently explode. Girard successfully demonstrated the concept, but deploying these hooking trailers into active combat zones proved to be an impossible logistical nightmare. For being a dangerous jet-powered ornament hanging on a wire, the Vertige scores an 8. Hanging from a wire is wild, but imagine being stuffed inside a tiny pod and dropped from a massive bomber. Number 8 is the McDonnell XF-85 Goblin, known as the ultimate parasite fighter. In the late 1940s, the Air Force had a massive problem. Their giant B-36 Peacemaker bombers could fly all the way to another continent, but no fighter plane had the fuel range to escort them the whole way. The insane solution was to build a jet fighter so tiny that it could literally fit completely inside the bomb bay of the massive bomber. The Goblin was incredibly small, looking exactly like a flying metallic egg with wings. Weighing just 4,000 pounds, the Goblin had no landing gear at all. When enemy fighters attacked, the bomber would lower the tiny Goblin on a trapeze crane, release it, and the jet would defend the fleet. Once the aerial battle was entirely over, the Goblin had to fly back underneath the massive bomber and hook back onto the swinging metal trapeze midair to be pulled inside. Test pilot Ed Schock had to perform one of the most terrifyingly dangerous and physically demanding midair docking maneuvers in the entire history of United States military aviation. Connecting a tiny jet to a swinging hook underneath a massive bomber while battling the violent aerodynamic wake was practically suicide. During one terrifying test, the extreme turbulence smashed the Goblin into the heavy trapeze, completely shattering the canopy and knocking the helmet right off the pilot. Miraculously, he survived a high-speed emergency belly landing in the dry desert. For being a deadly flying nesting doll, the Goblin gets a 9. The Goblin was tiny, but our next machine is a massive transforming beast that literally shifted its entire body in order to fly. Coming in at number 9 is the LTVXC-142, a massive 4-engine military transport aircraft developed in the 1960s. It looked exactly like a conventional cargo plane right up until the exact moment it decided to take off. This was known as a tiltwing aircraft. To achieve vertical takeoff, the aircraft did not just tilt its propellers, it physically rotated its entire massive wing along with all 4 engines a full 90 degrees straight up into the air. When tilted up, it acted like an enormously powerful helicopter. Once high up in the air, the massive wing would slowly rotate back down, allowing it to cruise at impressive speeds of 400 miles per hour. The mechanical complexity of this beast was absolutely staggering, and the human stakes were incredibly high. All four engines were permanently linked together by a massive cross shaft. If one engine failed while hovering, the other three engines would keep all four propellers spinning rapidly so the plane would not immediately flip over and crash. However, the complex mechanical system suffered from constant, incredibly dangerous and frightening failures. The intense vibrations shook the aircraft violently. The nervous pilots always knew that if the heavy wing tilting mechanism jammed mid-transition, they would be instantly trapped in an unflyable aerodynamic nightmare plunging straight out of the sky. While it eventually proved the radical tilt-wing concept could work, the military deemed it far too mechanically fragile for rugged service. For being a massive transforming aerial machine, the transport earns a 7.5. We have seen flying saucers and umbrellas, but absolutely nothing compares to our final aircraft, which was known to dissolve its pilots. Finally, at number 10, we reach the absolute peak of aviation insanity, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. Developed by Nazi Germany during the desperate final years of World War II, this was not just an airplane, it was a manned missile. The Comet was a rocket-powered interceptor, explicitly designed to shoot up into the sky at breakneck speeds to attack high-altitude Allied bomber formations. Weighing around 8,000 pounds fully loaded, it was incredibly fast, capable of reaching terrifying speeds over 600 miles per hour, completely outclassing everything the Allies possessed. But the human stakes of flying the Comet were arguably the most horrific in all of aviation history. The extreme danger was not just the enemy aircraft, it was the volatile machine itself. The Comet was powered by two incredibly unstable liquid rocket fuels known as T-Stoff and C-Stoff. When combined, they combusted instantly. The primary problem was that T-Stoff was a highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide solution that was incredibly corrosive. It was so volatile that any hard landing or minor mechanical leak could easily cause the entire aircraft to violently explode mid-air. Worse still, if a fuel line ruptured inside the cramped cockpit during a violent crash, the toxic T-Stoff would literally dissolve the trapped pilot alive within seconds. Taking off was an absolute nightmare, riding a roaring column of explosive fire. Bouncing on the rough runway during a high-speed landing often resulted in a massive explosion from highly volatile residual fuel. More brave Comet pilots were tragically killed by their own aircraft than by enemy gunfire. For being the ultimate flying death trap, the Comet gets a chilling perfect 10 out of 10 rating. From hollow wooden barrels to deadly rocket planes, aviation history is filled with crazy engineers pushing the limits of physics and human bravery. These vintage airplanes prove the journey to modern flight was never a straight line. Which of these flying machines blew your mind the most? Would you have been brave enough to fly them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments right below. Make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible historical stories. Imagine a massive dark shape skimming just 10 feet above the freezing ocean surface at 250 miles per hour. Or looking up to see a giant mechanical skeleton lifting an entire house through the clouds. Have you ever wondered how these extreme and bizarre machines could ever leave the drawing board and actually take to the sky? Today we are going to strip away the engineering secrets behind the 10 most bizarre classic aircraft in aviation history. Stay with me until the very last moment, because the number one entry is a creature that looks like it escaped straight out of a science fiction nightmare. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now so you never miss a single thing that comes next. Starting off our countdown at number 10 is the Fokker Doctor 1, Germany's legendary mechanical nightmare introduced in 1917. During the bloody dogfights of the First World War, engineers faced a brutal battle for ultimate turn-fighting agility. Their solution was powered by an Oberursel rotary engine, producing 110 horsepower. Unlike modern engines, the entire massive engine block spun with the propeller. It created an iconic asymmetric clattering sound and generated immense gyroscopic forces that violently pulled the 2,000-pound plane to the right side. Visually, engineers bolted 3 stacked wings onto a single fuselage. making the aircraft jut out like a desperate flying wooden staircase painted in bright, intimidating colors. This bizarre triple-wing design sacrificed top speed, which maxed out at only 115 miles per hour. But in return, it gave the aircraft an unmatched, terrifying rate of climb and agility. In its practical application, it became the ultimate WWI dogfighter, allowing ace pilots to outmaneuver almost anything in the sky, turning tightly inside the radius of conventional British and French biplanes. However, there is a dark mechanical reality here. This pursuit of extreme agility came with a deadly structural flaw in the upper wing drag cables. In steep, high-speed dives, the aerodynamic pressure was so intense that the upper wing fabric would literally tear off. Leading to catastrophic mid-air disintegration, it was a near-death reality for every pilot, including the infamous Red Baron. But if stacking 3 wings seems like a desperate, fatal move, wait until you see the flying wooden scaffold sitting at number 9. Enter the Caproni CA-3, a heavy bomber built by Italy in 1915 to fight a brutal battle for heavy payload capacity. To get this massive 7,200-pound wooden structure off the ground, engineers relied on 3 enormous Isotta Fraschini engines, each producing 150 horsepower. 2 engines pulled from the front, while a third engine pushed from the rear. The result was a chaotic, unsynchronized, deafening roar. It shook the bones of anyone flying it at its maximum speed of 85 miles per hour. When you look at the Caproni, it visually looks less like an airplane and more like a massive construction scaffold with a canvas cage bolted onto it. It featured a bizarre twin-boom tail holding the entire flimsy structure together. In terms of practical application, it was a pioneer of early strategic heavy bombing. The Italian military used this sprawling, slow-moving target to carry up to 1,700 pounds of bombs deep into enemy territory, unleashing destruction while flying barely higher than the mountain peaks. Now, look closely at the rear of this bizarre machine to find its most terrifying flaw. To defend the aircraft, the rear gunner had to stand completely exposed in a flimsy open-air basket, perched directly above the spinning wooden blades of the rear pusher propeller. They were dodging enemy anti-aircraft flak, while praying a sudden jolt did not send them falling backward into the deadly blades. That was a monster of the First World War. But the next aircraft took the shape of a pregnant water bird. At number 8 is the Grumman J-2F Duck, deployed by the United States Navy in 1936. This machine was the answer to a highly complex amphibious rescue puzzle, weighing in at nearly 5,500 pounds empty. To power this heavy beast out of rough waters, it was equipped with a rumbling 900 horsepower Wright Cyclone radial engine. It could reach speeds of 190 miles per hour, a respectable number for a machine that had to fight the massive drag of its own hull. Grumman's engineers undertook a massive bulbous central pontoon and awkwardly blended it directly into the main fuselage. Visually, it looked heavy, bloated, and entirely unaerodynamic, earning its nickname as the ugly duckling of the fleet. Yet, in practical application, there is a hidden brilliance to this deformed shape. The lower section of that massive chin pontoon actually housed a watertight cabin that could fit a stretcher and a medic, making it an incredibly durable utility in rescue aircraft for plucking downed fighter pilots right out of the freezing ocean. The brutal reality of flying the Duck involved horrific, bone-jarring impacts. Rescue crews purposefully slammed that massive pontoon into 10-foot ocean swells in the dead of night, trusting the heavy riveting to hold together. Test pilots reported near-death experiences during rough landings, where the immense water drag nearly flipped the aircraft end over end. It was hideous, but it was a mechanical hero built for punishment. If the Duck was strangely shaped for water, The aircraft at number 7 was deformed for hunting submarines in the dark. Say hello to the Fairey Gannet, introduced by the United Kingdom in 1949. The British military needed the absolute reliability of 2 engines for long maritime patrols, but they only had room in the nose for 1. Their solution was the Armstrong-Siddeley double Mamba engine, pushing out over 2,900 shaft horsepower. It took 2 independent turbine engines, shoved them into a single housing, and drove contra-rotating propellers, propelling the 10,000-pound aircraft to over 310 miles per hour over the cold ocean. Visually, the Gannet was an absolute mess. It featured a bulging multi-tiered cockpit that looked exactly like 3 separate glass greenhouses stacked haphazardly on top of a fat Z-folding wing structure. In its practical application, this strange layout was highly necessary. The pilots sat up front, while the radar operators sat in the rear greenhouses, hunting for Soviet submarines. The unsaid brilliant truth of the double Mamba was that both engines drove a shared coaxial gearbox. If one failed, you simply cruised home safely on the other. However, the real nightmare of the Gannet was not aerodynamics. It was the terrifying mechanical complexity of that shared gearbox. Maintenance crews suffered, trying to keep the intricately geared contra-rotating shafts from tearing themselves apart under extreme stress. Furthermore, the sheer noise of the twin turbines, emitting a high-pitched, piercing whine, was known to cause permanent hearing damage on the flight deck. The Gannet was a weird military experiment, but the civilian world produced something straight out of a post-apocalyptic wasteland to take our number 6 spot. At number 6 is the Transavia PL-12 air truck, built in Australia in 1965. This plane was built to haul a massive 2,000-pound hopper of toxic agricultural chemicals safely over the harsh outback. Powered by a sputtering Continental flat-six engine producing just 300 horsepower, it struggled to push its bizarre frame through the air at a cruising speed of only 105 miles per hour. It was a purely functional, gravity-defying tractor, meant to work low to the ground in blistering heat. Visually, the air truck literally looks like spare parts from 3 entirely different crashed airplanes bolted together. It features a stubby central pod, completely separated twin tail booms, and an elevated cockpit perched on top. In its practical application of crop dusting, the missing context for this absurd shape is ground safety. The twin tails were separated specifically so that chemical loading trucks could back directly up to the rear fuselage without striking the aircraft, keeping the deadly toxic dust away from the pilot sitting high above the chemical tanks. Due to its extreme unaerodynamic shape, the air truck was notoriously dangerous and tricky to handle. It suffered from severe instability in sudden crosswinds. Pilots often wrestled with the controls just to keep it flying straight. It was so inherently aggressive in its ugliness and strange proportions that it was famously chosen as the villain's aircraft in the movie Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Before we cross the threshold into the top 5 most insane machines ever built, remember to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into heavy machinery. Coming in at number 5 is the Beechcraft Starship, unveiled in the United States in 1989. This aircraft represented an all-out war to defeat aerodynamic drag using bleeding-edge composite materials. Powered by twin Pratt & Whitney turboprops, mounted as pushers at the rear, generating 1,200 horsepower each. It emitted a distinct buzzing thrum, weighing over 14,000 pounds. It was designed to cruise at 380 miles per hour, aiming to revolutionize the high-speed corporate travel market with its composite airframe. Visually, the Starship was stunningly bizarre. It completely abandoned the traditional tail, featuring sweeping main wings with massive vertical tips and futuristic front canards. It looked exactly like an alien spacecraft cruising through corporate airspace. In practical application, It was built for luxury executive transport, offering a spacious, whisper-quiet cabin. Since the roaring engines were pushed far behind the passengers, it was meant to be the absolute pinnacle of sleek modern aviation, replacing loud, vibrating aluminum airplanes with smooth carbon fiber. But here is the critical flaw that killed it. Because carbon fiber construction was so new, federal regulators did not trust it. They forced Beechcraft to drastically over-engineer and thicken the airframe, which destroyed its weight advantage. It became incredibly heavy, sluggishly slow, and ridiculously expensive to maintain. Selling only 53 units, it was a massive commercial failure, choked to death by regulatory paranoia. The Starship failed the corporate world, but our next machine was a Cold War experiment that walked a deadly mechanical tightrope in the sky. Number 4 is the Bell X-22, an American experimental aircraft from 1966. Long before modern tiltrotors existed, Bell engineers attempted to make a 15,000-pound heavy transport plane take off vertically. Powering this complex rig were 4 General Electric turboshaft engines, producing a combined 5,000 horsepower. These engines allowed the bizarre craft to hover completely still, or reach a top forward speed of 250 miles per hour. It was a massive, deafening mechanical beast, attempting to conquer the vertical takeoff and landing puzzle. Visually, it completely abandoned standard wings. Instead, the X-22 had 4 massive tilting ducted fan barrels mounted on a short, stubby fuselage. In practical application, it was a highly advanced military testbed. The goal was to prove that troops and heavy cargo could be rapidly deployed into tight jungle clearings without needing a runway. Combining the speed of a traditional airplane with the hovering capability of a helicopter. The ducted fans were heavily shrouded to increase lifting efficiency and protect ground crews from the spinning blades. However, the mechanical insanity lay beneath the skin. The engines did not directly drive the fans they sat next to. Instead, they fed into a centralized, incredibly complex web of high-speed drive shafts. The transition from vertical hovering to horizontal flight was an absolute terror. Test pilots fought deadly, violent mechanical vibrations that constantly threatened to shatter the drive shafts mid-air. One wrong resonance frequency, and it would tear itself apart. If 4 giant tilting fans were not crazy enough, imagine a screaming helicopter with absolutely no body at all. At number 2 is the A-90 Orleanok, a top-secret Soviet project from 1972. This was an Ekranoplan, a massive 300,000-pound machine, built to ride the ground effect cushion of high-pressure air just above the water to evade NATO radar. To move this steel mountain, it relied on a massive Kuznetsov turboprop howling on its tail, producing 15,000 horsepower. It blasted across the freezing ocean surface at an incredible top speed of 250 miles per hour, hovering just 10 feet high. Visually, it was a terrifying mechanical sea monster, half naval ship and half airplane, painted in stark military gray. In its practical application, it was designed for high-speed amphibious Soviet assaults. It could carry over 150 fully armed Marines, or 2 heavy battle tanks directly onto an enemy beach, completely undetected by conventional ship radar. But the missing data is in the nose. It actually hid 2 massive turbofan jets buried up front, used exclusively to blast high-speed exhaust under the wings to break the water's brutal suction. It was an incredibly dangerous machine to operate. In 1975, during a high-speed test run, the hull struck a rogue wave, and the entire heavy tail section ripped completely off. In a sheer display of terrifying pilot grit, the captain managed to throttle the hidden nose engines and literally drove the wingless, mangled fuselage back to the naval base like a shattered speedboat. The Orleanok was a Soviet giant. But The American machine sitting at number 1 is the ultimate gravity-defying behemoth of aviation history. Number 1 is the Aerospace Line Super Guppy turbine, taking flight in 1965 to fight the mechanical battle of the space race. NASA had to move massive Apollo-Saturn rocket stages, and trains were simply too small, weighing over 100,000 pounds empty. 4 Allison turboprops shrieked in agony, producing nearly 20,000 horsepower to push this aerodynamic nightmare through the air. It was a desperately slow beast, maxing out at 280 miles per hour while fighting an unbelievable amount of atmospheric drag. Visually, the engineers took a thin vintage bomber tail and bolted an impossibly swollen bulbous whale forehead right onto it. The scale is incomprehensible until you actually stand next to it. The cargo bay is 25 feet in diameter and incredibly cavernous. In practical application, this massive bay was hinged to swing completely open, allowing crews to slide entire space station modules and rocket boosters directly inside. It could easily swallow a complete 2-story suburban house, roof and all, directly into its gaping mechanical maw. It was a terrifying aircraft to pilot. The Super Guppy was incredibly dangerous to fly in heavy crosswinds because the massive side profile acted like a giant sail, threatening to flip the plane out of the sky. It was structurally ridiculous and deeply flawed. Yet, and without this bizarre flying whale, NASA could never have transported the delicate rocket components across the country in time. Without the Super Guppy, America might never have successfully reached the moon, proving that sometimes the strangest designs achieve the greatest triumphs in human history. These machines weren't just crazy designs, they represent raw engineering pushed to its absolute limits, proving that real solutions to impossible problems often look like complete madness. Which of these flying oddities did you find the strangest? Which one would you want to see fire up its engines in person? Is there a bizarre aircraft I completely missed? Tell me in the comments. Drop a like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Every week, there's a new heavy machinery video. See you next time. Have you ever imagined squeezing yourself into an aircraft? Something smaller than the pickup truck sitting in your driveway. Picture looking up and seeing a plane so terrifyingly tiny that a strong gust of wind looks like it could snap it in half. Yet, it tears through the sky with a roaring engine. Today, we are going to answer the ultimate question: how small can an aircraft get? Before takeoff becomes mathematically impossible, stay with me all the way to the very end. Because the number 1 aircraft on this list does not even look like an aircraft. It looks like a bizarre flying barrel with wings, and it holds a world record that will never be broken. And if you love insane machines like this, hit subscribe right now, because we do this every week. We start with the Cirrus Vision Jet, the world's first single-engine personal jet, certified by the FAA. And I know exactly what you are thinking right now. How does a luxury jet end up on a list of the smallest aircraft in the world? But hear me out, because we have to set the baseline for extreme engineering. Manufactured in the United States, this marvel bridges the gap between high-performance piston aircraft and massive corporate jets. It is the benchmark of safety and commercial viability. Before we descend into mechanical insanity, designed for owner-operators who want to bypass commercial airlines, it redefines personal luxury. Now, to put the scale into perspective, this entire private jet weighs significantly less than a fully loaded Ford F-250 Super Duty pickup truck. Let that sink in. Under the roof sits a Williams International FJ335A turbofan engine, generating 1,846 pounds of thrust. The aircraft cruises at over 300 knots, that is 345 miles per hour, while carrying 5 adults and 2 children in complete comfort. Visually, It looks like a luxury sports car that grew wings. Its wingspan is only 38 feet, and the compact V-tail design drastically reduces its hangar footprint. That massive engine, mounted directly on top of the carbon fiber fuselage, gives it an aggressive futuristic silhouette that is unmistakable on any tarmac. It blends modern aerodynamic efficiency with the sheer aggressive presence of a fighter jet, yet remains accessible for recreational pilots. The most insane feature of this luxury machine? It comes equipped with the Cirrus airframe parachute system. If things go catastrophically wrong at altitude, a rocket deploys a massive parachute to float the entire jet and its passengers safely back to Earth. The truth is, that safety feature has already saved lives in real-world emergency scenarios, making it a favorite among affluent families. It is a brilliant piece of engineering, high performance, with unmatched peace of mind, but if a $3 million personal jet with a parachute seems a little too refined and sensible for your taste, hold on tight, because our next machine strips away the jet fuel entirely and brings the craziness directly to your backyard. Next is the pivotal Helix, and if you saw it sitting quietly on the ground, you probably would not even know how to get into it. Built by an innovative aerospace company in California, this personal electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft does not just look weird, it fundamentally changes the basic physics of taking off. It is a single-seat tilt aircraft, while some gearheads remain skeptical of electric power. You must respect the insane power-to-weight ratio here, weighing only 348 pounds. This machine is essentially a motorcycle for the sky, and here is the truly wild part. The US government classifies it as an ultralight vehicle, meaning you do not even need a pilot's license to fly it. Fact: the Helix utilizes 8 independent electric motors, producing a combined 74 horsepower, delivering instant torque for vertical lift. Its tandem wing tilt configuration allows it to transition from hover to forward flight seamlessly, reaching speeds of 62 miles per hour. Now, look at this. Here is why the visual design is absolutely mind-blowing. It has no wheels and no traditional landing gear. When parked, it rests entirely on its tail, pointing straight up at the sky like a rocket. To take off, you climb into the cockpit while lying on your back. You launch vertically. Amazing. And once you gain altitude, the entire aircraft tilts forward into horizontal flight. The pilot sits in an exposed carbon fiber cockpit, surrounded by a lattice of spinning blades, producing a high-pitched synchronized whine, like a swarm of angry mechanical bees. Imagine the severe spatial disorientation of launching straight up on your back and then aggressively pivoting face forward in midair. It feels less like flying an airplane and more like riding a high-tech roller coaster without any tracks. Because it meets FAA Part 103 regulations and lacks complex mechanical linkages, it is also surprisingly easy to maintain compared to traditional helicopters. It is a bold frontier in personal aviation, pure thrust, zero complexity. But if this silent, battery-powered marvel seems a little too futuristic, our next machine takes the electric revolution to a completely new level of raw power. Welcome to the Wild West of electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, eVTOLs. If the Helix is a nimble sports bike, the Air One is the electric muscle car of the sky, developed by a cutting-edge Israeli startup. This two-seat eVTOL is designed to make personal flight as ubiquitous as driving a sedan. Forget complex gas engines and heavy fuel tanks. This machine now runs on 8 independent electric motors, generating a combined 771 horsepower. It weighs only 1,318 pounds empty and features fully aerodynamic collapsible wings. That means when you are done flying at cruise speed, You simply fold the wings and park the entire aircraft inside a standard single-car garage. This is not a concept. This is the future of daily commuting. The AR-1 is equipped with 8 motors, generating a staggering 771 horsepower, channeling massive torque directly into vertical lift, powered by a 74 kilowatt-hour battery pack, mounted low for stability. This beast carries a 551-pound payload. Visually, it looks exactly like a giant, sleek racing drone that somehow swallowed the enclosed cockpit of a Lamborghini. When those rotors spin up, they create a localized hurricane. The acoustic signature is a deep, resonant hum that vibrates through your chest, distinctly different from smaller drones. When you push the throttle, those 8 rotors spool up with a high-pitched screaming whine, straight out of a science fiction movie. Absolutely, it demands respect. Designed for daily commuting, the AR-1 cruises at 100 mph with a range of 110 miles, and it does not need a runway. You step inside, power up those massive rotors, and lift straight up into the clouds. Now, here is the million-dollar question. If you could afford one, would you trust your life to an all-electric flying drone? Or do you still prefer the mechanical roar of a traditional gas engine? It is a stunning achievement in high-powered electric aviation. But if the comfort of a high-tech cabin feels too safe, get ready, because our next machine is so stripped down, it will leave the pilot completely exposed. Prepare yourself to witness the absolute purest, most terrifyingly exposed form of mechanical vulnerability in the sky. We enter the realm of pure mechanical madness with the Gen H4. This machine, meticulously developed by an extreme engineering team in Japan, officially holds the Guinness World Record for the world's smallest coaxial helicopter ever flown. It is so stripped down that calling it a helicopter feels like an exaggeration. There is no cockpit, no windshield, no tail rotor, no doors. It is literally just a lightweight aluminum pipe frame, a simple saddle seat, and 4 roaring 2-stroke engines strapped directly above the pilot's head. It weighs just 155 pounds in total. It is a terrifyingly brilliant piece of engineering that pushes the absolute boundaries of what a personal flying machine can be. Crazy. The Gen HP4 is powered by 4 separate 125cc 2-stroke engines, the exact kind of screaming engines you would normally find on a heavy-duty dirt bike, producing a combined 40 horsepower. These engines spin 2 massive 13-foot contra-rotating blades at 860 RPM. The sound is an aggressive, deafening buzz, like 4 modified chainsaws running at wide-open throttle right above your skull. The visual design is nothing short of pure insanity. You, literally, sit strapped onto an exposed metal chair, grab the front handlebars, and throttle up. Steering is accomplished by physically shifting your weight and pulling a control bar. Exactly like a hang glider, it looks like a futuristic flying skeleton. When activated, those 4 dirt bike engines roar simultaneously, and you are lifted straight up into the brutal atmosphere, totally exposed to the rushing wind, unforgiving weather, and gravity itself. One thing is clear: the sheer bravery required to fly a lawn chair directly into the clouds is completely staggering. Because it lacks a tail rotor, it cannot auto-rotate in an emergency. If all engines fail simultaneously, the craft drops. The human factor here is staggering. You are suspended hundreds of feet in the air, legs dangling entirely at the mercy of 4 tiny engines. It was built for the pure, unfiltered thrill of flight. But if dangling from an aluminum chair is not extreme enough, our next machine is a Cold War masterpiece. That proves you do not need millions to own the sky. Now, we officially enter the high-risk danger zone of aviation history, and we find the Nisus gyroplane emerging from the proud mechanical heritage of Slovakia. This machine is a love letter to the garage-built era of aviation. Gyroplanes are incredibly unique beasts, unlike helicopters. The main rotor is unpowered during flight, spinning freely in the wind to generate lift, while a rear-mounted engine pushes the aircraft forward. The Nisus is powered by a heavy-duty Rotax 915 IS engine, pushing out 141 horsepower. Despite that powerful engine, the entire aircraft weighs only about 650 pounds, creating an incredibly aggressive power-to-weight ratio. It represents the quintessential do-it-yourself spirit, where practical mechanics triumph over expensive factory technology. Here is the craziest part about its design. Unlike a traditional helicopter, the massive top rotor is completely unpowered. It is not connected to the engine at all. Strange indeed. As the rear propeller pushes the aircraft forward, the rushing wind catches the free-spinning top rotor blades and naturally creates lift. Visually, the Nisus looks like a dune buggy with a propeller strapped to its back and a rotor blade bolted to the roof. It is nothing more than a minimalist welded steel frame wrapped in a tiny aerodynamic fiberglass pod, leaving the pilot completely exposed to the violent rushing air. When you fire up the engine, it spits out a throaty rhythmic rumble that instantly brings a smile to any true gearhead's face. The sheer beauty of this rugged machine lies in its ultimate mechanical safety feature, because the top rotor out is not mechanically driven by the engine. If the engine violently fails in midair, the gyroplane will not plummet like a rock. The unpowered blades continue spinning in the wind, allowing it to float down slowly and safely, like a parachute. It is a brilliant piece of mechanical survival engineering. It requires only a short runway to take off, but can land almost vertically, making it perfect for backcountry exploration. It proves you do not need millions to experience the freedom of the skies. But if you appreciate the mechanical purity of the gyroplane, our next aircraft takes the DIY aesthetic even further into pure unapologetic garage territory. Now, we are diving deep into the raw, uncompromising realm of the ultimate garage tinkerer. Imagine walking into a hardware store, buying high-grade wood and fabric, and building a functional airplane right in your backyard. That is the spirit of the SpaceX SD-1 Minisport. Born in the Czech Republic, this single-seat tail-dragger is the definitive true microplane. This extreme aircraft has a tiny wingspan of just 19 feet and an empty weight. I want you to hear this number clearly, of 242 pounds. 242 pounds. This fully functioning airplane is significantly lighter than a mechanic's heavy-duty rolling toolbox. It is the ultimate expression of the garage build philosophy, bringing the dream of flight down to a personal buildable scale. The engineering beneath the fabric is rock solid. The airframe is primarily constructed from spruce and plywood, covered in highly durable synthetic fabric. It is powered by a small engine producing 24 to 50 horsepower. Essentially, the exact same type of engine used in heavy-duty commercial riding lawnmowers. Incredibly, though, it still hits a cruising speed of over 100 mph because the aircraft is brutally light. You do not simply sit inside it, you basically wear it. The cockpit is so dangerously tight that adult pilots have to slide in like they are forcing themselves into a rigid sleeping bag. The sound of the two-cylinder engine is a nostalgic, steady popping rhythm, a stark contrast to the jet screams above it on this list. But here's the genuinely terrifying part of flying the SD-1 Minisport with an aircraft this brutally light. The physics of danger are always actively working against you. A sudden strong crosswind can toss this 242-pound wooden bullet around the sky like a dead leaf in a violent hurricane. You are not just casually flying this machine, you are physically wrestling the atmosphere for survival. The SD-1 arrives as a kit, requiring hundreds of hours of painstaking labor. And when a pilot finally takes to the skies, they are not just flying an airplane, they are flying their own craftsmanship. It bridges the gap between flying and building. But if wooden fabric seemed too traditional for your adrenaline cravings, strap in because our next machine swaps spruce for a screaming military-grade turbojet engine. Prepare yet for your eardrums to shatter. The Sonex Subsonex is not just a small airplane, it is a pocket-sized fighter jet, and it is the modern-day undisputed king of the personal microjet. This machine answers one burning question: what happens if you strap a screaming turbojet engine to an airframe no larger than a smart car? The result is one of the most aggressive, high-adrenaline micro-aircraft ever conceived. Weighing roughly 500 pounds empty, the Subsonex looks like a conventional jet fighter that was accidentally left in the dryer for way too long. It brings the raw intensity of military jet performance to the recreational pilot's front yard in kit form, built by your own hands. The heart of this tiny terror is a PBS TJ100 turbojet engine, the exact engine designed for cruise missiles and drones, producing roughly 250 pounds of raw thrust. That generates a violently fast power-to-weight ratio when strapped to an aluminum frame that weighs less than a grand piano. Visually, it features a distinctive Y-tail design, an aggressive shark-like nose, and an oversized canopy. That gives the pilot a commanding fighter pilot field of view. Because of its extremely tight dimensions, you do not simply climb into the Subsonex, you practically strap the entire aircraft to your back. When the pilot hits the ignition, the Subsonex does not rumble. It shrieks. The ear-piercing turbine whine makes the ground shake, supreme, once airborne. It tears across the sky at speeds exceeding 200 km/h. When the throttle is pushed wide open, the turbojet roars to life, transforming this tiny piece of aluminum into a screaming rocket. It is utilized heavily by airshow performers and hardcore adrenaline junkies who demand jet-powered extreme aerobatics, but on a personal budget. Watching one perform at an airshow is a surreal experience, compact, impossibly loud, and blindingly fast. It represents the ultimate expression of modern mechanical capability, high-speed aerobatics now as an accessible dream. However, if the Subsonex represents the modern era, our next aircraft is the legendary granddaddy that started the entire craze, a machine so iconic, it captured the world's imagination through the silver screen. Welcome to the golden era of the Cold War and extreme garage tinkering. No list of micro-aircraft is complete without the king of pop culture, the Bead BD-5, and specifically the jet-powered BD-5J, holding the Guinness World Record for the world's smallest jet for several decades. It was designed by visionary engineer Jim Bead. If you grew up in 1983, you absolutely know this machine. It is the exact microjet that James Bond famously piloted through a tight hangar. In the opening sequence of Octopussy, that single scene captured the world's imagination like nothing else, proving that aviation could be both high performance and insanely compact. It sparked a kit plane revolution and remains a beautiful, dangerous testament to the ambitious engineering of the 1970s. The BD-5J is staggeringly small. Empty weight, just 358 pounds. Wingspan, 17 feet. Tucked inside that tiny fiberglass fuselage is a roaring micro-turbo TRS-18 micro-turbojet engine, producing 200 pounds of thrust. When you sit in the BD-5J, you do not sit upright. You are in a fully reclined Formula One racing position, with your legs stretched entirely out in front of you. You do not sit in this aircraft. You practically wear it, visually. It looks like a deadly aerodynamic bullet with stubby wings. The acoustic signature is an unforgettable high-pitched scream. That sounds entirely disproportionate to its frame, thanks to its incredibly low drag and powerful thrust. This garage-built fiberglass bullet can rip through the sky at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. The story of the BD-5 is a tragic yet fascinating chapter in aviation history. Jim Bead promised the ultimate high-performance aircraft for the everyday man, taking thousands of deposits from hopeful buyers across America. However, due to engine development delays and eventual bankruptcy, very few were ever completed. The pilots who did fly them were genuine pioneers, risking their lives in a highly sensitive, unforgiving airframe. The BD-5J undeniably proved to the world that home-built jet aircraft were entirely possible. But if you think the BD-5 was bizarre, our next aircraft is so utterly weird that you will question how it manages to defy gravity at all, powered by two engines barely bigger than chainsaws. If you thought a wooden plane was small, the brilliant French engineers behind the Colomban Cri-Cri looked at that challenge, laughed out loud, and decided to strap two engines onto something even teenier. Meet the Colomban Cri-Cri, the smallest twin-engine manned aircraft in the entire world, and easily the most comical-looking machine on this list. Designed in the early 1970s by Michel Colomban, it looks less like a real airplane and more like a practical joke. The name Cri-Cri translates to cricket, and one look explains why. This dual-engine machine weighs significantly less than the average American adult male. A standard Harley-Davidson motorcycle dwarfs it in both size and weight. The engineering layout is absurd. Instead of mounting engines on wings, Colomban bolted two tiny 15-horsepower single-cylinder engines onto pylons projecting from the nose, just inches from the pilot's face. The combined 30 horsepower sounds like a pair of angry chainsaws fighting each other. The cockpit is a tiny bubble canopy perched on what appears to be a metal cigar tube with a wingspan of barely 16 feet. When you fire up those two tiny engines, they do not produce a deep rumble. They scream like high-powered chainsaws at wide-open throttle. The noise is absolutely deafening for the pilot sitting inches from the exhaust, yet, despite its empty weight of just 172 pounds, the Cri-Cri is a beast, fully aerobatic, capable of pulling G-forces up to plus 4.5 and minus 2.5, performing loops and rolls that would tear larger aircraft apart. Cri-Cri is a triumph of minimalist engineering. It proves that you do not need massive horsepower. To achieve high-performance flight, you just need a brutally light airframe and nerve. Test pilots report that it handles like a go-kart in the sky, requiring constant minute adjustments that demand total concentration. It is a machine, dangerous, thrilling, and uniquely French. It remains a legendary experimental aircraft, pushing the limits of what a pilot and machine can achieve together. But, as extreme as the Cri-Cri is, it pales in comparison to our final machine, a story of obsession, rivalry, and the moment physics finally said no. This is it. We have reached the absolute pinnacle, undeniable, of mechanical madness. This is the Star Bumble B-2, the smallest biplane ever flown, and it boldly looks less like a functioning aircraft and more like a bizarre insect, heavily armored, desperately trying to stay airborne. To understand the Bumblebee, you must know about the ego-driven rivalry of the 1980s between American engineers Robert Starr and Ray Stitz. They were locked in a bitter battle to build the world's smallest airplane. Starr wanted to crush his rival completely, and his solution was the Bumblebee 2. He broke that world record not just once, but twice, visually. It defies all logic. Just 8 feet 10 inches long, shorter than a golf cart. It is the ultimate tale of American obsession. The final iteration, the Bumblebee 2, achieved the ultimate record with an impossibly short wingspan of just 5 feet and 6 inches. Now, I want you to understand how absurd that is. The wingspan of this heavy airplane is significantly shorter than the height of the average American man. Weighing 396 pounds empty, it was forcefully powered by a Continental C-85 four-cylinder engine, pushing 85 horsepower, strapped to a frame, with virtually no wing surface to generate lift. Starr could not rely on aerodynamics. He relied on pure brute force. The aircraft did not so much fly, as it was violently dragged through the air by the propeller's force because of its massive fat fuselage and impossibly tiny wings. The parasitic drag was colossal. It possessed zero glide capability. The stall speed was terrifyingly high. If the engine ever quit, it would instantly drop out of the sky like a solid block of cast iron. On May 8, 1988, Starr strapped himself into this coffin to claim the world record miraculously. He succeeded, reaching 400 feet. But then the unthinkable happened. The engine failed. With zero glide capability, the Bumblebee 2 dropped like an anvil and crashed violently into the ground, miraculously. Robert Starr survived, proving he was as tough exactly as the steel he used. The plane was destroyed. But here is the extraordinary part. Its record remains unbroken to this day. It is the ultimate cautionary tale, a moment where the obsession with records pushed a man to conquer physics only to be brutally punished. It is a story of human courage and the absolute edge of aviation, and it is the perfect end to our countdown. From jets, worth multi-millions of dollars, to tragic record breakers, these 10 machines are not just aircraft. They represent the relentless spirit of engineering, the refusal to accept limits, and the courage to strap into unproven machines. All of them had one thing in common: real solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Which one did you find the strangest? Which would you have the guts to fly? Is there a micro machine that I missed? Let me know down in the comments. Hit subscribe for more mechanical marvels, and next week we explore together the most dangerous submarines in the world. Have you ever imagined standing on a quiet dirt runway when suddenly a bizarre machine no bigger than a riding lawnmower roars to life and violently tears into the sky right in front of your eyes? Picture this: an experimental aircraft that weighs less than a grown man, yet packs enough raw thrust to rip you through the clouds at terrifying speeds. Are these microscopic flying machines the ultimate masterpieces of mechanical engineering, or just the death trap toys of absolute madmen? Today we are uncovering the 10 smallest, most shocking microplanes ever built. Stick around until the very end, because the machine sitting at the number 1 spot doesn't even look like an airplane. It looks like a biomechanical creature that escaped a laboratory. Let us step back into the 1950s. Imagine you are an aviation enthusiast, but you also love fishing on remote, isolated lakes. Designer Volmer Jensen had a wild idea. What if you bolted a pair of fabric wings onto a fiberglass canoe? The result is the VJ-22 Sportsman, an amphibious flying boat that looks like a backyard experiment gone incredibly right. It is powered by an 85 horsepower engine. This engine sits in a pusher configuration, mounted unusually high above the main wing. Now, take a close look at the engineering of this unusual watercraft. You have to ask yourself a serious question. How does a heavy boat hull with a heavy engine mounted that high not instantly flip over the moment you hit the throttle on the water? It completely defies your standard center of gravity logic. Yet it works beautifully on the water. It was specifically designed for the weekend explorer. Those who wanted a reliable, real solution to landing on lakes without needing an actual runway. Jensen originally built this as a personal passion project, but it quickly became a highly sought-after design for home builders across America who wanted adventure. It was a true pioneer in recreational flying boats, but while a tiny flying boat is charming, practical, and still looks somewhat like a traditional airplane, our next machine proves you do not even need a proper factory to take to the skies. You just need a backyard garage, some plywood, and a serious amount of bravery for this next ride. Welcome to the ultimate do-it-yourself garage builder's dream originating from the 1980s. The Team Minimax is a pint-sized nostalgic warbird that weighs less than a modern Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Think about that for a second. You are flying a machine with an empty weight of around 400 pounds. This little single-seater was designed specifically so that ordinary guys could build it in a cramped one-car garage using only basic woodworking tools. We are talking wooden ribs, simple fabric skin, and a very cheap engine. When you sit inside the cockpit, you can probably still smell the fresh sawdust and wood glue from your own garage. It usually runs on an engine producing around 40 to 50 horsepower. This gives it the power of a heavy-duty riding lawnmower. It is a genuine, real-world application of bringing aviation to the working-class man. But looking at its incredibly fragile wooden frame, you have to wonder how it survives the rough turbulence of the open sky without snapping like a small dry twig. Thousands of American men built these incredible little machines, fulfilling their ultimate blue-collar aviation dreams on a strict budget. It became a massive phenomenon, proving that personal flight was not just for the wealthy elite. But if flying a tiny wooden box built in your living room sounds a bit too risky to you, you might want to brace yourself. Our next classic aircraft strips away the enclosed cockpit entirely, leaving you totally exposed to the rushing wind and the terrifying open sky above. Moving right along, we have the Baker Supercat, a magnificent design created by John Baker. The Supercat is a parasol monoplane that looks like it flew straight out of a classic 1920s black and white cartoon. It is a true masterpiece of vintage nostalgia built for pure enjoyment. There is no heavy enclosed cabin and absolutely no complex modern avionics inside. It operates on a small, simple engine, usually around 50 horsepower. This pushes the lightweight frame through the air at a leisurely 80 miles per hour. When you fly the Supercat, you are not isolated from the sky, you are completely submerged in it. The wind is constantly blasting your face, you can smell the raw exhaust of the engine, and you can lean right over the side to look straight down at the earth below. It was built as a practical escape for purists who hated the sterile, enclosed feeling of modern cabins. But seeing how exposed the pilot is, you definitely have to question the safety during bad weather. John Baker originally designed this plane because he wanted to capture the magic of barnstorming without the massive costs associated with antique biplanes. It is charmingly bare bones, delivering a true throwback experience to the golden age of early aviation history. However, if you think the Supercat gives you an intense open-air experience, you have not seen anything yet. The next aircraft on our list takes that exact concept of outdoor flying and pushes it to a terrifying new level of absolute, complete physical exposure. Born in the late 1990s, the Aerolite 103 is not so much a traditional airplane as it is an aluminum lawn chair strapped to a spinning propeller and a parachute. This machine legally falls under the strict Part 103 ultralight regulations. This means it weighs less than 254 pounds empty, holds a maximum of 5 gallons of fuel, and amazingly, does not even require a licensed pilot to fly. It uses a small two-stroke engine pushing around 28 to 40 horsepower. Now, carefully look at the visual profile of this contraption. There is no fuselage, there are no doors, there is literally no floor beneath your feet. The pilot sits entirely outside the aircraft structure, fully exposed to the open sky. With no cabin and zero physical protection from the elements, how does the pilot not freeze to death or get completely blown off the tiny seat in a strong gust of wind? It takes serious, undeniable nerves to trust an aluminum tube at 3,000 feet. The Aerolite 103 became insanely popular because it offered the cheapest, most visceral way to conquer the sky, selling thousands of kits to thrill seekers nationwide. Before we move on, do me a huge favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to help YouTube show these incredible machines to more people. So, sitting completely outside the plane is undeniably crazy. But our next entry puts the pilot inside a metal tube, barely wider than your own shoulders, and powered by a very familiar car part. This brings us to Maury Hummel's legendary creation, and it is a marvel of sheer engineering audacity. The Hummel bird is an all-metal aircraft so ridiculously tiny that you do not really step into it. You practically wear it like a metal suit. The fuselage is so incredibly narrow that broad-shouldered pilots actually have a very hard time squeezing inside the cockpit. But the most shocking and brilliant part of this entire machine is the unique power plant hiding just behind the small metal nose cone. It does not use an expensive, purpose-built aviation engine. Instead, it is powered by a classic air-cooled Volkswagen Beetle engine that has been literally chopped in half. That is right. It uses only 2 cylinders and a custom-machined crankcase, producing roughly 30 to 35 horsepower. It is a highly practical solution for cheap, efficient flying. But honestly, can you imagine trusting your life to half of a German car engine from the 1970s? It sounds like a perfect recipe for a mid-air mechanical disaster. Despite the obvious skepticism, Hummel's design proved incredibly safe and won numerous awards at major experimental aviation shows. He survived a horrific plane crash in a different aircraft, which inspired him to perfect this ultra-light, ultra-cheap metal bird. Trusting your entire life to half a car engine is a wild concept for any pilot. But what if your personal aircraft did not have any wings at all? Prepare yourself, because we are about to step out of the garage and into the realm of modern science fiction. Moving far away from the dusty backyard garages, we now enter the ultra-wealthy world of Silicon Valley billions. Backed heavily by Google co-founder Larry Page, the Kitty Hawk Flyer was an extremely ambitious, multi-million-dollar attempt to finally create the legendary personal flying car. It was an electric vertical takeoff and landing machine, completely ditching traditional aviation fuel for massive lithium batteries. It featured an array of 10 powerful electric lift fans. This system was designed to revolutionize how regular people commute across lakes, rivers, and open private properties. Visually, it looks exactly like a futuristic jet ski, levitating on massive drone fans. There are no wings, no enclosed cabin, and no conventional airplane controls. You straddle the seat just like riding a motorcycle, hovering over the water using extreme fly-by-wire computer stabilization. Critics immediately ask terrifying questions. What happens if the complex software glitches or a battery catches fire mid-flight? You have zero glide capability, meaning a total system failure would immediately send the rider plunging violently straight down into the water below. It was a highly controversial project that generated massive internet hype, but ultimately, it could not overcome regulatory and technical hurdles. Despite the massive funding and incredible sci-fi appeal, the project completely crashed and burned in the corporate world. This proves that revolutionizing aviation takes more than just tech money. From billionaire science fiction dreams, we now move back to the humble wooden shed for a completely different kind of pocket-sized machine. This next tiny airplane savagely defies gravity through pure old-school aerodynamic violence and extreme pilot skill. Designed back in the 1960s by brilliant Australian engineer John Corby, the Starlet looks exactly like a beautifully crafted wooden toy plane. It is significantly smaller than a standard compact car, weighing only about 400 pounds empty. It is powered by a modified Volkswagen engine or a small Jabiru engine pushing around 60 to 80 horsepower. With a wingspan of only 18 feet, it is a tiny, nimble machine. It was built specifically for high-stress, high-adrenaline amateur aerobatics and incredibly sharp, aggressive aerial maneuvers. Do not let its charming, delicate wooden appearance fool you for a single second. How can a tiny frame made entirely of spruce wood and plywood handle the violent G-forces of loops, barrel rolls, and snap rolls? The structural integrity required to pull extreme maneuvers in an aircraft this incredibly small is absolutely mind-boggling. It takes a pilot with absolute, unshakable faith in their own carpentry skills to take this wooden thing upside down at over 130 miles per hour in the sky. John Corby originally entered this design into a competition and, amazingly, it did not win first place. However, builders around the world fell in love with its performance, making it a legendary staple in amateur aerobatics communities globally. Performing extreme aerobatics in a tiny wooden plane is intense, requiring massive courage and focus. But if you want to talk about truly radical, mind-bending designs, wait until you see an aircraft shaped exactly like a folded paper airplane, completely constructed out of heavy welded steel tubing. Stepping fully into the 1960s, John Dyke designed an experimental aircraft that quite literally stopped traffic wherever it went. The Dyke Delta JD-2 is a heavy machine compared to our previous entries, with an empty weight around 1,000 pounds. It is powered by a massive 180 horsepower Lycoming engine. It uses a radical delta wing design with absolutely no traditional horizontal tail surfaces. It was built for efficient, high-speed cross-country cruising. It can reach speeds of nearly 200 miles per hour up in the clouds. Visually, it looks exactly like a bizarre UFO saucer or a military stealth fighter built 3 decades too early. Engineering skeptics at the time simply could not believe their eyes. With no tail and a wide, flat triangular body, how does this heavy metal triangle not stall and fall out of the sky like a brick during slow landings? The secret lies in the extreme aerodynamics. It generates lift across the entire flattened body of the aircraft, essentially turning the whole fuselage into one massive wing. John Dyke designed it with another unbelievable practical feature. You can fold the wings back and physically tow it backwards down the highway behind your station wagon, exactly like a camping trailer. This UFO turned heads and caused absolute confusion at every airshow it ever attended. But if a flying UFO-like plane seems extreme to you, our runner-up is going to blow your mind. Get ready for a terrifying needle-nosed bullet that was built from scratch for one singular purpose. That is pure, unadulterated, and extremely lethal straight-line racing speed. Forget everything you currently know about small, kit-built airplanes. The Nemesis NXT is a sleek carbon fiber monster designed by John Sharp with one singular and aggressive goal: to absolutely dominate the grueling Reno air races. It is powered by a highly modified twin-turbocharged Lycoming engine, pushing well over 350 horsepower. It is a highly advanced racing machine that is tightly wrapped in an aerodynamically flawless cowling. This is not a weekend cruiser. This is a highly weaponized racing platform, designed to break every existing record. Visually, it is a literal missile with tiny, razor-thin wings. You have to ask yourself, how does a tiny garage-built two-seater completely outrun commercial airliners? Because the incredibly aerodynamic Nemesis NXT can shatter straight-line speeds of over 400 miles per hour. Flying this beast is not for the faint of heart. It terrified even veteran military combat pilots with its relentless, crushing G-forces around the tight racing pylons. One wrong twitch on the control stick at 400 miles per hour, and it is instantly game over. John Sharp and his team dominated the racing world, setting record after record and making the Nemesis NXT a terrifying legend in the aviation community. The Nemesis represents peak speed, operating on the absolute ragged edge of fixed-wing flight capability. But if strapping yourself into a 400-mile-per-hour carbon fiber missile seems like the most extreme thing a human can do, our final entry throws away the airplane concept entirely. Prepare yourself for a machine that turns the pilot into an actual living aircraft component. This is it, the absolute climax. The most extreme, shocking, and sensationally bizarre personal flying machine on the planet today. The Copter Pack is a modern Australian invention that completely blurs the line between a human pilot and a functional aircraft. It operates entirely on high-capacity battery packs, powering two massive electric motors. These motors spin large carbon fiber rotors. They generate enough raw thrust to lift a fully grown adult straight up into the air. It is a stunning real-world application of heavily scaled-up drone lifting technology. Visually, there is absolutely no cockpit. There is no protective fuselage, and there are certainly no wings. The brave pilot literally wears the heavy aircraft gear like a backpack. When you strap into this harness, you look less like a traditional aviator and exactly like Marvel's Falcon or an actual sci-fi cyborg. Let us seriously talk about the extreme danger factor here. You have two massive high-speed rotors spinning violently, just inches away from your unprotected head. One simple mechanical failure and things get incredibly dark. Because there are no wings, this machine has zero glide ratio. If you suffer a complete electrical failure while hovering high above the trees, you will drop instantly like a heavy stone. Yet, when test flight videos of this incredible machine first hit the internet, it completely shocked the world. It vividly proved that the crazy futuristic jetpack dreams of the 1950s are finally coming true. It is absolutely terrifying, it is undeniably brilliant, and it is the ultimate final expression of personal human flight. We have seen wooden garage projects, car-powered metal tubes, and human-sized electric drones. They all represent humanity's relentless, crazy obsession with defying gravity. Now, I have to ask you, which one of these machines did you find the strangest? Which one would you actually risk your life to fly? And is there a shocking tiny aircraft that I completely missed? Let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because next week we are looking at the most dangerous heavy tractors ever built.